Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show. Joe, how do you say your last name?
Paquet.
Paquet. I'm the worst when it comes to names. I even hesitate saying the name Joe. So, so I just realized, you know what? I'm just gonna let you say your own name, and that's how we're gonna do it. So yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. Normally, what I like to ask Joe, and the first question really is, what are you currently working on? What is it that you're doing currently?
Well, I've been working large, painting large outside, which is something that greatly intrigues me. So, studying rich neutral color and how that serves chromatic color.
Mm-hmm.
More than anything, it's the challenge of being able to keep a large canvas fresh, at least start it that way. So it's something after many, many years of painting that I've been working on that's very exciting to me right now.
That's cool. That's cool. Now, when you say large, like what are you looking at? What's your scale?
28 by 40 is a size I particularly love. Up to 30 by 40, but not much larger than that because I like to be able to get it on a French easel.
Okay, nice. You're not talking feet then, right? Yeah, big murals.
No.
Heavens, and then, no. Now you like to paint outside. Are you doing like a plein air, or you just like to paint outside?
Yes.
Okay.
No, but plein air painting. Largely trying to hold on to the singularity of the day, nice. Even at a very large scale. Trying to take what I've been able to do on a small scale and instead of taking a small study into the studio and just enlarging it, the last I don't know how many years I've been working on. That idea of starting with that freshness and beauty and spirit of place.
Mm-hmm. And when you're doing that, are you finding a formula that's working for you?
Boy, I'll tell you, it's no.
Okay.
There is no formula. Every day is so different. I do try to make sure that my palette is set before I go out, that my surface is, toned. And I mean, I do absolutely everything I can do, but, Mother Nature has her way with you, whether you like it or not, And so you have to be willing to adapt to, you have an idea in your mind, what you want or what you might even expect for the day. But the truth is that more often than not, that gets foiled and you have to adjust.
That's awesome. And is this a multiple day project, or is it something you're trying to achieve?
Well, yes. Yes, I've I just finished a large painting of Duluth, Minnesota industrial landscape, which I particularly love to paint. And I brought a large canvas up just before Thanksgiving and a couple smaller canvases and just, had a great time painting. And the sun was coming up through the clouds. It was a particularly beautiful morning. And, but it was a big canvas, and big canvas is intimidating all by itself, but trying to paint a fleeting effect on a big canvas is almost insane. And so, but I just said, this is what I'm here for. I've been painting for 30 years. If I'm going to ever try it now, I'm just going to try it. So I did, and I went for broke, and I realized that if the sky and the water, and particularly in the painting, had to jive beautifully. And it was rich, beautiful color. There was no snow yet, surprisingly, up in Duluth, Minnesota. This is right on Lake Superior.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to cover the entire canvas in one session, to cover it,
Wow.
get it relative,
Mm-hmm.
and get the harmony that I wanted. The rest of it, I ended up finishing it off in the studio. Spent probably a week doing 20% of the painting, and I spent 4 hours doing 80% of the painting outside.
Nice.
So that I particularly I love. I was fortunate. I was able to get what I was after.
Mm-hmm.
There are days that doesn't happen because it's it's just like I said, nature of the beast. It depends what you're going after. I don't like working from photography. I don't like painting from photography. I don't have an issue with anyone else that does.
Mm-hmm.
But I will use a reference photo to serve information in the painting or to check things. But I try to do as much as I can with nature, from nature. And even when I'm away from nature, just look at the painting and let the painting tell me what it needs.
That makes total sense, man. It's funny when I had a couple students that in their mind they were calling the photo reference, but in reality they were just copying. And I had one student, and there was this red stop sign that I'm like, dude, why don't you just take the stop sign out? He's like, what? But it's not in the photo. And it was funny because he inspired this phrase that we have at the academy called "F the photo," and so what I had him do was, before he started painting, was to sit and scream at his photos, "F you, photo," just to kind of like separate, that he wasn't a slave to this thing, that he was the artist, and it set him free, man. It set him free. So we like, F the photo.
Well, that's funny. I have a very crass phrase I use in my class with the people I know well about that spot of red that you're talking about. And anyway, probably best not repeated.
Well.
But it's funny. The students. Well, we work I teach 2 night classes a week here,
Okay.
and I've been doing that for this will be my 22nd year.
Oh, wow.
And I've taught many, many, many people, and I've trained a lot of very good painters over the years. And they start out with photography because that's all they have.
Yep.
And what I try to do is teach them to dissect an image, to how would I say it? Not to copy it, but to break it down, organize it to light and shade, and visually clarify that light and shade, rather than simply copying forms that are in front of them. Anybody can render.
Yep.
And rendering is not making art, as far as I'm concerned. I've never been a great fan of these photos that you see online of these people doing these giant paintings with a 000 brush of a big wave curling or something. To me, suggestion and edit are what makes a piece of art a piece of art.
Indeed.
And without that, the rest of it is copying. And of course, that's how we all start out.
Yeah.
But when you study the masters, you see very quickly, if you take the time to go to the museums and really look at what's going on, it's so much about what they don't put in the painting. Howard Pyle, the great American illustrator, said they'll never shoot you for what you don't put in a painting.
That's awesome. It's so true. Yeah, that's brilliant, man. That's brilliant. It's a tricky thing. I know Rockwell struggled with the photography at first, and then he, I guess, had this rule that when he would paint, to make sure that he wasn't copying, he would work with multiple photos. So he would just never work from one photo. He would have, by having multiple.
But I actually have a little different take on that, Don.
Uh-huh.
I do I've given a talk on him in my studio a number of times on what happened when he went from working from life to when he started using photography. Mm-hmm. And I show examples of the work. If you look at the paintings he did from the Edison Mazda lamp company in the early 20s, I think it was, they look like little Vermeer paintings. The lights are modeled and the shadows are flattened. And when he started using photography, he couldn't stop looking into everything. So even though the paintings are still amazing paintings, they're over observed. If you look at Saying Grace, the painting of the old lady and little boy and the two teamsters in the diner,
Yeah.
you can see what kind of shoes they're wearing under the table.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in the natural optics, you'd never even notice their shoes. And if you look at his early paintings versus his later ones, he even said in his letters that he could not stand how tightly he was painting. He said, I'd paint drunk. I'd paint with the end of a shingle, the end of a brick to try to loosen up. His work got more controlled rather than less controlled as he got older. And I think that was more of a byproduct of the life he was living.
Yeah. He had the deliberate product.
Yeah. It was personal stuff. He had he was living a lie, Rockwell, and that's going to sound audacious, but what I mean by that is he was presenting himself as this homespun character, with this perfect life, with his house in Vermont and his awesome wife who did everything for him and his kids that worked in the local diner. But the fact is, he was never home. Even though he was home, he was, even at Christmas, after Christmas dinner, he'd go back to the studio and work. He asked his wife to do everything for him instead of hire somebody so he could tell everybody his wife was doing it, and she ran her ragged. She drank and smoked and ended up in a home, and he didn't want anybody to know about it. His life was spinning completely out of control. And because of that, his paintings, the control in his paintings increased.
Because it was something he could control.
And so, yeah, that's exactly right. So he controlled the death out of them. And so the later work, instead of getting looser or more suggestive, which you would just assume would happen with that many years and that much genius, the work got tighter and tighter and tighter and more hyper observed, I guess is the way I'd say it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you weren't expecting that conversation.
No, I wasn't. But that's beautiful. I love it. And it's very strange because Rockwell's like my idol, and he always has been Rockwell since I was like, I don't know, 10. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was 11 or 12, I had to do this. I think I was about 11. I had to do a book report. And so I read his book, The Life of an Illustrator. And
yes, I have that book.
It's a great book. But there's a section in it he talks about when he was a young boy and where he had this club. And to get and inside this club, they had this one boy wanted to get in. They dropped a rock on his head or some stupid thing like that to initiate him into the club. But the reason why this club exists is I guess they met in this old house or whatever, and they had boxes of National Geographics so that they could look at the African women. And sure. When I read that, I just busted out laughing because I was 11 years old and my parents thought I loved science because I was always looking at the National Geographics. And I was just like,
that's funny.
Just bare-breasted women all over the place. Yeah, so at that moment, I just busted out laughing, and I got connected to Rockwell ever since. It was like, all right, this
I got it.
So that's what you're working on. These plein air, large scale paintings. So Joe, what I'd like to know is where did Joe come from? Before you're out there painting the way you are today and teaching and things like that. Like I hear an accent in your voice. Like where do you come from, man?
My wife would probably say Mars, but I come from New Jersey, and which in some cases could be the same thing.
Yeah, it's the garden planet.
I grew up in northern Jersey, and with we all have a unique story, and I had she passed lovely German, 100% German from the old country mother. Who actually plowed with oxen when she was a little girl. Wow. And a father who was giant, 6'6" Irish, French Canadian, just wonderfully sweet, artistic dad. And so he was always painting or sculpting on the weekends. But he had these giant hands. I mean, like a silverback gorilla, size 17 ring. I mean, he was just a monster. And my tiny 5'2" German mom who was always knitting and sewing. And so I grew up with a very intense, both work ethic, and yet I had art around me. And when I wanted to go to art school, they were totally behind it, which just blew me away. But, but you were asking earlier just a little bit about the idea of struggle. And I had a situation where I couldn't start in the fall term because the school was so full. It was the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And in the 80s, it's still an insanely popular school, but it was certainly one of the best schools in the country. Even though I got in, I had to wait until spring. My father got me a job in a warehouse in Jersey City, New Jersey.
Nice.
And I was the only white guy that worked in the warehouse. So I got to see what it was like on the other side. And I was a maintenance guy. Talk about being ill-suited for, but I was a big, strong kid. So I would do anything my boss asked. But, I worked every day with these guys that worked on the loading dock, or some of them their job was to run a freight elevator. And, I'd sit down, we had lunch together every day, and I worked with these guys, and they were tough customers. They were street kids, grew up hard, most of them. And, some of them had, out of prison, had killed people. I mean, it was a scary crowd. But I just kept thinking to myself, how lucky am I, that I get to leave this place. That this is a stopping point for me, and all of these guys, most of them, that's as good as their life was going to get. And I got to go to art school, and, and there was some pretty intense incidents at this place, that were pretty scary, where, you could get hurt real easy. And I remember at the end of my 7 months saying goodbye to these guys. And I'll tell you, you never met a more grateful kid going off to school. When I'd get on the train every day to go into New York to go to class, I'd come home. My mother would say, "How was your day?" I'd say, "It was great. It was great." I got a chance to see what life is like without choices, without options. And so that was something. So I was lucky, and to have the support of my parents, and to have a stable stable upbringing, and all of those things that if you don't have to think about it, you don't think about it. But when you get out there and you see so many people that don't have the chance, so I've just always considered myself very fortunate.
That's amazing, man. I love that you acknowledge it and you own it. But when I was in university, it was very easy to see, because the character of the kids were very different. The ones who were supported by their parents. And the school I went to had a lot of international kids. And so a lot of them were in, architecture or computers, that stuff. But when you went into fine art and illustration, most of the countries that had kids that were in there, their parents had to be extraordinary, because the culture itself, a lot, especially like in Asian cultures, they'd be like, "What, you want to paint? You want to be an artist? Like, what's that? Go do something in the computers. Like go do something. Be a graphic designer."
There's a different kind of result or orientation in that culture.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so I'd look around and I would just see that the energy of the people would be very different, who came to college with support. And I'm not just talking financial support, just like, we have your back. We
emotional support. Yeah, you got real. Yep.
And then I also would notice, like, especially with the graduate students, and this is one of my philosophies in education. I think it's so wise that you never send your child directly to university after high school. That if you could give them that,
Mm-hmm.
A year, 6 months, a year to go do something like go get a job and feel what that looks like, or travel, or, just let them some time to decompress from high school and
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh, wait, the world is very different than that. Um, when they go off to university, they go off with a gratitude because they know why they're there,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just night and day. Um, and so I that's just really cool, man, that you had that experience. You had that support as well as the uh,
Yeah, it's funny because my
space.
parents weren't all like touchy feely, like squishy. You
Hmm.
know, they weren't like they weren't gushing all the time. Like I had a good buddy who was Italian, and I loved being in their house. Everybody's hugging each other all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
time. It's just awesome, you know. But I had abject love, abject support. But it wasn't, if I remember bringing artwork in the house and I'd show it to them, and they'd go, "Oh." Not, oh my God, you're fabulous. You are the best. No, it wasn't that, it was, it was, it was different,
I
but
got you.
they were awesome.
That's awesome, man.
Awesome.
So now you went to university, or not the art school. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was fantastic. The instructors, many of them are out there still. I don't know if they're teaching at the School of Visual Arts anymore, but Jim McMullen, who was one of the top watercolor illustrators in the country, I had him for drawing, and he was a magnificent teacher. David Palladini was a great one. John Foote was a mentor to me. Opened the world to me, and then I had these great design teachers, photography teachers. I mean, they were the best of the best. Because of it, it was exciting. There was a lot of ego that you had to kind of wend your way through. But in terms of being result oriented, they didn't mince words.
Mm-hmm.
They were out there. They were the best of the best, and they were in one of the most competitive areas to do that kind of work in the country. So it was really exciting for me, just terribly exciting. I loved it. I loved it, and because I was very disciplined because I was a real intense athlete when I was a young man in
Okay.
high school, and so the discipline wasn't hard for me. Deferring to someone else wasn't hard for me,
Mm.
because I had been coached. And I find now that with all the teaching that I've done, if I have somebody that's been a hardcore athlete, they're the easiest to work with, because they're used to being coached.
Yeah.
So I don't think I was hard to teach. I was just so terribly excited, and I loved all of it,
That's
and it
awesome.
was a crazy time in New York in the 80s, the punk era. And it was a wild kind of a scene in the city, but the teachers in the school were just wonderful. And so I was, again, very lucky. And I was there at a time when you could afford it. I paid for a good deal of the school myself. And like you were talking about earlier, and I think that made a big difference. In my final 3 years of the school, I was able to set my schedule so that I could take 17 credits over the course of 3 days and then work full time the other 2 days of the week. So, I was always, pretty much had my nose to the grindstone.
That's cool.
And I always thought, and when I finally found my great mentor, John Osborne, painting teacher, after I got out of school, I had this dream. You talk about the struggle. How do you make a living as an artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you gonna do? What's your fallback? That's whatever the running joke about all of it, right? Learn to be a good waiter. But I always thought in the back of my mind that maybe that if I could apply the discipline that made me a good athlete to this thing that I loved, that maybe, just maybe, I could make a living at it. So,
That's
and so
awesome.
far, so
And
good.
you did it.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, almost any business book or whatever that you read, it all comes down to the discipline. It's you could also, so one could make an argument that the discipline trumps talent, and
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. I went to art school with some insanely naturally gifted people, many of whom got scholarships to
mm-hmm.
SVA, and they were usually the laziest. They were pretty full of themselves at that time. They were the rock star in high school, and they came in and they were the rock star in their first year at school. And then what was interesting, and almost to a person, they all just kind of fell away and didn't go much further, but I love to draw, and I mean, it was insane for figure drawing. I just absolutely adored it. Mm. And so I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to stay on this. And maybe if I work when other people are playing, mm-hmm. then I'll have that chance. Because as an athlete, I don't even know why I stayed in sports. I was such a skinny kid. I was built like Norman Rockwell when I started high school. I was 140 pounds and almost 6'1". And I decided I wanted to wrestle and play football and throw the shot put and discus. And so, as you can imagine, I was used as a tackling dummy for a while and things like that. But I just went into the weight room every single day, every day for those 4 years. Matter of fact, when I would in my sophomore, junior, senior year, I'd go to practice, come home, eat this giant dinner, go downstairs, have a weight room in my basement. I'd work out for an hour after practice.
Bam.
And I became a good athlete. And I thought, you know what? I think maybe I could do this. Like I said, because I love it. See, the thing is, if you really love it and you're honest with yourself and you're willing to, and when you're playing sports, it's not like somebody's opinion. Either you just got your ass handed to you or you didn't. It's not like,
exactly.
Like they say art is subjective. Well, I'll tell you, playing football is not subjective.
we just got in that argument last night. I think art is far more objective than subjective. And I think the subjective, I mean, I get what people mean by that, but it's so much more of a discipline. And, I always say to my students, one of the first things I say to them when they come into the academy is, when somebody writes a book or they set out and make a movie, you have the right to interpret it any way you want. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if you go see the movie Platoon and you walk out laughing, you're probably mentally disturbed. Right. I mean, it's like there was
kind of missing the point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the people who put it together had an idea, and they worked hard at communicating that idea. And so I think it's bullshit when an artist works hard at trying to communicate what's inside them, putting it up on a wall, and then someone else or themselves saying, oh, you can just interpret it as you wish it to be, and it's like,
well, here's the thing. Mm-hmm. What's lacking is clarity and economy.
Yep.
And knowing what you want to say, right? I mean, yep. I remember I studied the 20th century very heavily. I was fascinated by what happened, particularly with the New York School of Painting and how that affected the way we see art, the mm-hmm. way it's viewed in our time, even in the 21st century. And the audaciousness of people like Clement Greenberg, who said, well, Jackson doesn't know when he does a good painting. He needs me to tell him. And I thought, well, then Jackson doesn't know what he's trying to say.
Yep.
See, the thing is, if you know what you want to say and you understand your materials and you marshal your materials to say it, that's poetry. It's clear.
Absolutely.
And there's economy there.
Yep.
And I think that we bought into this idea that the enigma is what it's all about. You can interpret it however you want. Sure, you can interpret it. Of course you can interpret it however you want. But, when you, so much of, we were talking earlier about illustration, 20th century illustration, Howard Pyle in particular, the dean of American illustration, in most fine artists laughed at him, but I'll tell you, he was a better designer and organizer and a clarified picture maker than most of the 19th century salon painters.
Mm-hmm.
He understood the grouping of elements and edit and selection and connecting lights and connecting darks. And he wasn't rendering things, he was organizing these things.
Exactly.
And the rendering was always in service of the organization. And so when you start looking at all that, like, to me, and this is certainly just me, but when I go outside, there's a singular thing in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that particular day. And what is it about it that makes that day exquisitely beautiful? And how do I feel towards that thing? And if I can get both of those things, and I could do it in one skin of paint,
mm-hmm.
then I've completely done my job. That means I've been very clear about what I'm after.
Yep.
And it's not simply rendering or simply copying what's in front of you, because obviously it's all filtering through you. But at the same time, if I missed it, I know.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficulty of non-objective painting for me is not that it's not objective, or I don't mind an abstract image at all. I think they can be very beautiful, certainly. But this idea of channeling the unconscious, which is what they said they were doing, right? Pollock claimed to be channeling the unconscious. Well, if you're channeling the unconscious, it wouldn't be repetitive, right? The repetition is coming from whatever we're imposing on it. If you're truly channeling the unconscious, the things
when you
are
say
going to be
repetition
different all the time.
or the repetitive, what do you mean? Like the pieces looking
The
the
work
same?
looks the same all the time. The work looks the same. The pieces.
I thought you meant with inside
similar.
one piece. But okay,
no, I mean what I'm getting at is, the thing is, people like Francis Bacon said the same thing. Francis Bacon, I've enjoyed looking at his paintings, but they had a big retrospective of his work here in Minneapolis a number of years ago, and I went a number of times to see it. And his early work is very much out of his heart, but he would say it's completely unconscious the way I'm doing this. But anybody that studied design recognizes
exactly
the purposefulness of those marks and where they're placed. And then when you study Francis Bacon, you find out that he was an industrial designer earlier in his life.
Exactly.
So I think, people like to, I think that the bottom line is, however you decide to express yourself, and it doesn't matter to me how people express themselves, the world is big enough now, Don, for representational, non-representational painting, and you don't have to spit on one to elevate the other one.
Yep.
I don't feel that way at all. I believe me, I've had people say your work is just academic, or it's this or it's that, and they don't have a clue what it's like to stand in front of nature, or it's provincial. Provincial, okay, then Monet was provincial. Then Van Gogh was provincial because they painted from life and they painted outside. No, I'm painting my time just the way they did. Exactly the same. And I'm reacting to it in real time, in my time. So the bottom line is, like it or don't like it, at least I'm not painting a fantasy of something. Like, we've got a lot of artists that are out there right now that are painting, the way things used to look,
Exactly.
And I think, I think it's incumbent upon us, if you're going to leave some kind of, as my son called it when he was a little boy, paint tracks. If you want to leave some tracks of paint behind, at least let them be of your time. To me, that's exciting. And I think, to go back to what we were talking about, this idea of clarity and all that kind of stuff, however you do what you do, I think it comes down to external versus internal motivation. What drove you to paint the painting? And in the 20th century, when you read the big biographies, a 3-inch thick biography on Pollock and on de Kooning, and I've read everything I could get my hands on. And what you find out is it was a big pissing match going on with these guys. It was a scrambling for relevancy. I don't often hear people talking about loving what they're doing or being connected to it. What I hear about is so-and-so sold a painting for this much and I need to sell a painting for this much. So-and-so was with this other woman, so now I need to sleep with her. This was what was going on at the time. There was it's a scrambling for relevancy and trying to come up with something new.
Well,
and just because you come up with something new, it doesn't mean it's art. It might mean it's an expression, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's art in my world anyway.
Indeed. If it's, we were talking about rendering, and Kenyon Cox said, without design, you may have representation, or you're calling it rendering, but you will not have art. And it's also on the other side. Like, you may have these abstract concepts and things like that, or these neat methods of applying paint, like a Jackson Pollock. But if you don't have design, you don't have art. And oftentimes, like, if someone looked at your work and they might say, well, it's representational or what, not representational, but like, provincial and things like that. It because they can't read the design, they miss the whole point. And I feel like a lot of people in the arts, and it's not their fault. It's just that we haven't really taught design the way it needs to be taught as a literacy. And you go through a museum or a gallery, and if I go to a museum, I'll see 15 groups like see an entire exhibition before I get to the second painting. And it's just because they're looking at the surface. They're like, oh, that's a pretty painting. I like that. Or they move on. And they're not reading these things. And you can spend, easily 20 to 40 minutes with one image if you know how to read them and see and extract the design, composition, and understand. When you do that, you're getting into the mind of the artist and understanding why they put this here and why they put that there, and you're experiencing it from a very different perspective. Like, I was looking at one of your paintings, the one on the top of your Facebook page. I think I left a comment on it. And what I love about it is you have these little dots of these little lights, going throughout the scene. And I believe my comment was something along the lines of, those little dots make me feel almost like a call and response type of experience. That you're in this, let's say, this big field, and there's these souls that are just like popping their heads up over the cotton, and they're like sending out a word, right? And then another one picks it up and it sends it back, And when I'm looking at it, I see all these all these lights, and they're basically within this one horizontal inside your image. And yet your eye just keeps going back and forth within this certain little area, and yet it's surrounded, with this really beautiful scene. But the animation, the part that's alive, it's these little lights, almost like lightning bugs, flying around. There's just like do 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 do, and some are more saturated, and some are duller, and some have more yellow in, and some are white, and or cooler and warmer. And it's just, I enjoy looking at it just to have my eye bounce through it. It creates a very
thank you.
wonderful
I appreciate the observation, Don. That's actually what it's. The painting is designed. I mean, basically, to me, because I worked as a designer for years, the idea of hierarchy, right, of importance, primary, secondary, tertiary interest, right? Everything when we look at the world doesn't have the same level of importance wherever we're focusing. Everything else is relative to that. And I spend a good deal of time with the beauty of that. Like to me, plus when I create or when I teach, everything is equal to me. When I write, the times I've spoken, I've given a talk on authenticity and creativity. 9 times now across the country to a lot of places. To me, they're all equally important, and they can all have their own beauty to them. And painting is the same. Painting, doesn't always have to have an ugly stage like we're taught.
Mm-hmm.
I teach very, for people to draw with the brush and to find rhythmic connectivity between the forms and establish the hierarchy of the forms in the linear aspect of the drawing first.
Mm-hmm.
Primary forms, secondary forms, tertiary forms. And I teach an underpainting that serves that for the darks, so that if they're done well, each stage is beautiful.
Yep.
Everything, every aspect of it can be thoughtful. And so the idea of non-objective painting just has never appealed to me, because, I remember reading de Kooning saying, I don't know when a painting is finished, because he's starting very broadly and he's whittling, but the more you add to something, the more everything else reacts to it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's a very different approach than saying, this is what I'm after. To me, a great painting is like great writing for 2 reasons.
Mm-hmm.
First, great writing, my favorite kind of writing, has been written to be said rather than written to be read. Completely different.
Ooh,
right?
Expound on that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, basically, a lot of times when you listen to poets read their own poetry, it sounds pretentious because they're over enunciating, and it's like listening to professors talk to each other and professors speak,
mm-hmm.
right? Everyone's trying to impress each other. Why don't you just say something instead of trying to be something? Be something. And when somebody writes something because they have to say it, and they have a command of their language, to me, that is profoundly interesting, because when somebody genuinely has something very rich and deep to say, and they have the skill to say it, the words go away and the meaning takes preeminence.
Indeed.
Okay. And with painting, there's so much, I got to watch the words I use. It's self-play.
You can say masturbation. That's okay.
Yeah, people are so either they're trying to impress somebody else, or they're trying to let you know how much they know. I don't want to know how much you know. You know what I'd like to know? I'd like to know what you love.
Yeah,
that's what I'd like to know. To me, that's where the real risk in the world is. Everybody thinks that when coming up with something new is risky, right? Like. There was a group of artists here for a while. Yeah, they're all outsider artists. Really? Just by the very fact that you called yourself and you designated yourself an outsider artist is enough to make me want to vomit. Okay? The bottom line is, why don't you just do what you do, own what you do, and love what you do? But the fact is, a lot of people are painting ideas of things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, like I said, they're not communicating to the world what they love.
Yeah.
Now,
the
only time you're really at risk
mm-hmm.
is when you open yourself enough to tell the world what you love. Now, you can make a political statement. A lot of artists are political, or they're social in their commentary. To me, that's very safe, frankly.
Yep.
It's a very safe place to be. I think what's really hard is to have the balls to tell the world what you love. That's really hard to do, because then your heart's open. That's different. Opening your mind is one thing. Open your heart's something else.
Man, you're awesome, Joe. Man, that's man, and that's what it is. It's like, we so often are looking for some type of maybe validation or reason to do things, and at the end of the day, it's like there's an energy that lives in all of us, and it's a special energy because it's no one else has it, and there will never be anyone who has it, because it's
are hitting something. You are hitting on the head right now. I've been working on a book now
mm-hmm.
for quite a while on authenticity and creativity and the search for a singular vision. And the truth is, you hit it right on the head. In the end, the only thing that's new is you.
That's it.
That's it. But the hardest thing to do is embrace what you have to bring to the world.
Yep.
Because in our private moments, sometimes even the most arrogant people, as I'm sure you've experienced, are the most insecure.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to actually make art is to give up the idea of trying to make a living at
it. I'm a capitalist pig. I love capitalism. But in all honesty, in my early 20s, maybe my late 20s, I had to come to terms with this reality that I had to make a decision. Do I want the art for art's sake? Or do I want to compromise it? Now, I'm not saying maybe other people can do it, but for me specifically, I felt that I knew too much to compromise it. And so I made the decision. My father said to me, either you need to figure out how to make money so you can paint what you want to paint, or you're going to paint what other people want. And so I just felt like I had enough insight behind the scenes into knowing that what was important was, using this language to express some very deep, profound concepts. And ultimately, those profound concepts were just the man in the mirror, right? It was just me. How do I say this? It's like traveling. And this is kind of where my soul is. I don't like traveling. I don't like going on vacations. I don't like being a tourist. If I go to a place like I went to Portugal, I had a dream about Portugal 15 years ago. My ex-wife and I were going to move there when my daughter was about 2 years old, and the economy crashed, so we decided not to go out of fear. We should have went. And so ultimately I went last year. I said, enough is enough. I'm just going to go. And I ended up going for 5 months because when I travel somewhere, I, I, I need to go experience who I am in that space. It's not
in
about
that space, right?
In that space.
It's not about visiting.
It's
right.
not about visiting. I went to the museums, and I did that really because my friend wanted to go and see those things. But me, I just go and I sit and I just be with people. I sketch, I meet people, and I want to feel who I am in that space. And one of the reasons is because I think part of this energy that's in me came from that part of the world. Not that I think, I know it came from that part of the world. And so I was getting in touch with a very, I don't want to say ancient part of myself, but it was a very, very different part of myself. And when I left Portugal, the biggest gift that I had was I fell in love with me for the first time in my life. Like I was like, whoa, I'm pretty remarkable. And I know that sounds very arrogant, but I never had that challenge to kind of go out into a land. I'll tell you a quick story about it. There was a part where I just collapsed. It was in the beginning of the trip. I was in a place where I didn't speak the language. In all honesty, I ran out of money. I was just kind of like broken and broke, and I lost my stuff, and I was just in this weird place, and I got terrified. And I was standing in front of this hotel, and I was about ready to cry. And uh and so I went down this little alley and kind of went behind a trash can, and I allowed myself to cry for about a minute, and then I said, all right, get the hell up. I'm a man of faith, so I say, God hasn't abandoned you in this place. You belong in this place, so start walking. And I would just walk, and inside me, I would hear a voice that say, move left. And I go down left, and I go down right, and I go down this alley, and I would just listen. I just gave myself this exercise to follow this voice that was in me. And crazily enough, it led me to this place. I was looking for my cell phone, right? Because I had to get it fixed, and they put it in these different places, and I didn't know where the hell it was. And ultimately, I found it. I had to argue with these Indians over it, but I got it. And strangely, a month later, I kind of got myself situated. And a month later, I'm at this park, and I'm like, I wonder what's on the other side of this park. And so I walk to the other side of the park, and I'm standing in the spot that I was about ready to cry a month earlier. And I was like, whoa, it's so small. And then a month later, I was in the hotel closing on a big deal, right? And it was just this beautiful metamorphosis that I was sent in this space to be broken, just to realize actually how strong and beautiful that I am, and and so now, having that experience, I can help guide other people through that soul journey.
Less fearful, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is no fear. I mean, it's like, and when you feel it, when you realize what fear is, you're like, okay, that's cool, and that's what I appreciate about you, Joe. You're talking about that experience. I hear the experience in you when you were working out and and doing the exercise, the sports, and then coming home, eating your meal, going out, working out another hour. I hear the heart of a warrior in that, right? And specifically, I like to think about it as a samurai, because the samurai, in my opinion, has this beautiful blend of, I can with one hand take your life and another hand create life, either by the way.
There's a really funny proverb about that.
Oh, really?
And it was it took place in a Japanese garden. Supposedly a true story. You never know these things because it's ancient lore, right?
Yeah.
About a young gardener who was a former a warrior, and I'm trying to see if I can remember it precisely because it's exactly what you're talking about. He said, so the young man is his assistant, and he says, I thought, as a gardener and everything else, that you're a man of peace. And he said, I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Indeed. Yep. That's it. Man.
I don't know. I think learning to trust yourself is like what you experience in Portugal is really the bottom line for all of us. And it's not just our art is our vehicle, but to trust that voice. And most people not only do they not trust it, they don't believe that it exists.
Yep.
And they don't give themselves the quiet time for it to even occur.
Yep.
We live in a cult of busy. It's like a badge of honor right now. Oh, I'm busy. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. Really, what the hell are you doing? You're plugged in all the time. Just coming to the studio just before I talked to you this morning. I see a guy, bobbing up and down. He's playing with his phone in the front seat in front of me. And then I go to the light and there's somebody, I try to get through the light and they're sitting there looking at their phone. Everybody's on their phone all the time. Everybody is plugged in all the time. So the crux of what I'm writing about right now is the journey to find yourself requires isolation.
Indeed.
And a lot of people are just unwilling to do that because being alone with yourself, you're everything about you, for better and for worse, gets loud.
That's
and
awesome.
A lot of the people don't want to hear that static in their life. They don't want to listen to it anyway, But I think if you did, if you really took the time, I think we'd have more originality out there. I think the lack of originality has everything to do with, there's a number of things. Of course, was it Picasso said, good artists copy, great artists steal.
Yep.
I hate that kind of stuff. Those kind of platitudes annoy the crap out of me because even art criticism in the 20th century, they would, if they were talking about Don Victor's work, they'd always frame it between two other artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'd say Victor's work shows the leanings of Twombly, but the spacious contextual areas, nature of, blah, blah, blah. And somehow your work can't just be your work.
Yeah.
Your work has to be the derivative nature of everybody's work means it's tied to everybody else's work.
And there's
If you
nothing
just
wrong with that per se, because there is, it is a language, and so you will be influenced. It's like having
well,
an accent or whatever.
influence is one thing. Appropriating
Exactly.
mannerisms and ideas is something else. And we've been, people have been given permission by these great artists to appropriate other people's things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even Rauschenberg did. One of his pieces was an erased de Kooning, right?
Okay.
I mean, what an odd thing to me. This idea that art has become this thing where, or Mark Kostabi years ago in New York had his art factory. He didn't make any of the work at all himself. Even Warhol didn't even pull his own prints. Warhol had his assistant Bridget go down to a lithographer in New York. He'd say which colors he wanted and on the Maryland and on this and that, and then he would just pull the prints. I mean, it's all about celebrity. It has nothing to do with quiet.
Yeah.
This is the thing I don't get. I mean, we talk about it a lot. Yoga's become this cult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's a yogi now, which is fine. Everybody's namasteing each other, and they're great. Good for you. There's nothing wrong with being healthy and bendy and connecting. I love all that stuff, except that anytime anything becomes popular, it becomes something else.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's no longer internal. Then people are putting their yoga stickers on their back window and which gym they're in and blah blah blah. And for me, these searches that you're talking about, they by necessity should be private.
Yeah.
And that's why I think once an artist gets their training, they should disappear for 10 years and do their work.
Yep, I agree with
you.
you.
They should find out who they are and how their training influenced how they see the world, and then how they see the world through their training. And that takes time, and everybody's in a hurry. I see it now because a lot of my students are adults like yours, and a lot of them are, these people are brilliant at what they do. Doctors, lawyers, judges, I've got, a lot of high power people who've been these type A's who are really good at what they do. And their expectation is now to knock this out of the park. So within 2 or 3 years, they got to have a website, and they got to be in a gallery, and they got to do this, and they got to do that. All of the things that take them away from the internal motivation. It's kind of like painting is kind of like a relationship, right?
It is.
If you have a relationship and you don't have a great honeymoon, and I don't mean the actual honeymoon, I mean the beginning of a relationship. If you can have this amazing time with somebody that's so singular, that's the thing that carries you through all the difficult times, right? If you stay with somebody, I think painting is the same thing. If as soon as you get some rudimentary skills, you're ready to jump ship and get in a gallery because you need to get your ego salved, you're done.
Yeah.
You don't go anywhere from there. And I know that for a fact. That's not my opinion because I've seen it 100 times.
Well, it's because their focus is not on the art. It's on maybe the fame or the recognition or whatever it is. It's outside stuff.
It comes down to ego, Don. It all comes down to ego.
Let's focus on the ego. Okay, fair enough. That's a good way to put it. And that's and the struggle is learning how. I mean, I think basically self-preservation for the most part is probably one of the greatest forms of ego, and it's learning how to push that to the side so that you can move past what you would think is a fear, so that soul, that energy, that's in you, which, well, we won't get into that conversation, but it can express itself. It can actually have access to this material visual world. And, I always tell my students, as artists, we're quote unquote communicating visually, but to master it, you have to master the invisible. You have to master
Well,
composing in space, not
that's
line.
beautifully said. Okay, I had 3 experiences in my life where I witnessed art. I didn't see it; I witnessed it.
Brilliant. Okay,
and that means I felt it on a soul level without being corny at all. And the last time was when I was in Florence. It's the second or third time I got to see the Unfinished Slaves by Michelangelo. And I stood in front of those things, and I had tears in my eyes. I could feel it. So how the hell can a block of stone resonate feeling? What was Michelangelo doing that very few people have ever done? The spirit of the connection for the work that he was doing was locked in that stone, and I could feel it when I stood in front of it. That's magic. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it happened to me when I was 20 years old, looking at the study for the Libyan Sibyl, his red chalk nude. I held it in my hands in the print and drawing room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was in a little frame. I took a picture of it. I was looking at all these master drawings, and I felt something so profound when I looked at that. And I realized at that time that art could be so much more. But the art can only resonate that which it's been given in its making. So if you're thinking about money, if you're thinking about fame, if you're thinking about all that stuff, that's all the work can ever give back to anyone, no matter how well crafted it is.
Wow. It's beautiful, man. It's we're gonna wrap up here in a minute, because I know you have to do a coaching.
Well, that's a good place to end, I think.
Yeah.
That's an upbeat spot.
With everything we're saying in terms of design, composing, I like how you were at the end there saying, we can't have this divided mindset. It's like when we're doing the art, we need to be present. We can't be thinking about future this, future that. Am I going to get paid on this? Am I going to get famous on this? Or what? You got to be in the relationship with that muse, and and when we incorporate design into it, I like to teach design in layers, and each layer is a thought. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and then you move to the next. And I know that's what you were kind of saying too, where you're starting out with a line, and then you're doing values, and when you know your story, what is it you want to communicate, then each of those layers, if you achieved it or not. And let's say you go through a process, and there may be 7 layers. Well, if you don't know what it is that what the muse and you are wanting to express, then each layer has its own voice. And when we take that final painting and we stand in front of it, and you have 7 voices, meaning the lines are saying one thing, the values are saying something else, the spacing is something different, it becomes schizophrenic. And we feel this disjointed.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I totally agree with you. I think part of it is, here's the phrase that might serve what you're saying. George Inness the great American landscape painter, talked about that thing. He said it's about preserving the original impulse.
Exactly.
And that everything needs to serve that original impulse. And in the newsletter I sent out yesterday with this new painting that I did of Duluth, it might have been the one you saw with the lights in it. That was the dominating thought as I was finishing it, was, how do I preserve the original impulse? And how does every piece of this hold on to that, that original, or like Whistler said, which I wrote in the newsletter, he said, a painting should be like a single breath blown on a plate of glass. And
beautiful.
I love that thought. That kind of that kind of singularity, that everything is harmonious everything is part of something else. And all of those parts have a hierarchy in service of saying a singular thing.
That's beautiful, Joe. So if somebody wants to get into your newsletter, man, how can they contact you? How can they get in touch with you?
Oh, you can go to just go to www.joepaquet.com.
You want to spell
my
that out real quick?
website. Yeah, www.joe, Paquet, PAQUET.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then right on my homepage, you can sign up for the newsletter. There's archived newsletters on the site so people can see what they're like. And generally what I like to do with the newsletter is have a new work at the top and then kind of talk about where that new work took me.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it was about this. It's oddly enough, the very last thing we talked about, that idea of the singular impression or original impulse.
And do you send them out frequently, or do you send them out when you're working on a new piece?
Actually, I don't send them out super frequently, maybe every month and a half.
Oh, okay, cool.
So it's not like people are bombarded with information. And of course, it's secure and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they can sign up on my homepage for the newsletter. And then that, it shows everything that I'm working on, workshops, classes. I just got a new set of brushes. Richardson Company is putting out a set of brushes for me. Really wonderful set of bristle brushes. Podcasts, which we're going to have to get you on the next newsletter.
That's awesome.
And then I just did a podcast a few days ago. Oddly enough, for when it rains, it pours. And then what else? Oh, I do online mentoring and online critique.
Beautiful.
And people can either sign up for a single mentoring session or for a 5-hour mentoring block,
Nice.
where we go deeper. And I can't take a whole pile of people, so I'm not in a hurry. If people really want to do it, and we fit it into the schedules, and I'm doing one as soon as I get off the phone with you, as a matter of fact, with somebody in New Jersey. And so I've got people all over the country doing that. And then otherwise, it kind of, it's, new painting shows, all that kind of stuff. So, but always a little bit of the kind of musings on art and philosophy and theory that I love, as you do. I mean, I think if you're going to do this for a lifetime, it really behooves you to love all of it. And I love all of it. I love to lay out a fresh palette. I love the way a canvas looks before you ever touch it. To me, there's such beauty to the tools, to all of it. And so when I do my newsletter, I put the same care into the newsletter I put into my paintings. And so to me, it's all the same. It's all, reflects on me.
Before I let you go here, Joe, I want to say two last things. One, you guys have listened to this conversation. Joe has a depth of intelligence and ability to articulate. And that comes from, obviously, a man who has fallen in love with the discipline, not of just art, but of life. And so I would really, really encourage you guys to go sign up for his newsletter. If you're looking at any training, go get some training from him, because there's a lot of people out there who are teaching, but there has to be a certain soul, certain character behind it. And I can just feel it from you, Joe, that you resonate, like you're an authentic, real teacher, and the respect that you have for your teachers. And I'm going to come back and end it with this. You're extremely blessed in this, that your mom and your dad, everything that you said about your parents, your mother's work ethic, that work ethic. And I love the fact that you said that she had that work ethic, and your dad was, this loving, caring artist fella. He was a big man, and not saying, he had work ethic too as well, but I can hear their connection in you. Like you are the product of them. And
that's lovely. That's lovely. And I so appreciate that, because I lost my mom 6 years ago. I miss her all the time. We were very close. My dad's at the end of his life, and they're awesome. They were who they are, and never pretended to be anybody else. And I was really lucky. And you know what? I adored them, and they love me, and I think that's about as good as it gets. So thank you for saying that.
Beautiful, man. Well, we'll talk another time, man. Have a great time. Ciao.
You too. Great to talk to you, Don.
Thank you. If I was going to give a little award, outside of just a praise, I would give you, Julie, what I would call my owl award. And an owl. And the reason why is because I see three things in you. And I just want to take a moment to to honor you on those because, well, you earned them. When I think of an owl, I think there are a couple very magical animals in the world. There's a lot. Oh, they're all magical in their own way, but I've always loved the owl. It's something I also see in my daughter, and it happens to be, I think, one of her favorite animals as well. But you have the ability to see. You see the big picture. You see how it all works together. And the reason why you can do that is because you feel very comfortable in an analytical space. And so your ability to see and your ability to think. And then I remember once we were in a meetup and my internet just kept going out and out. And it went out for, I don't know, almost 30 minutes, right? It was just so, and I was so irritated because it was like the first time that I wasn't part of the meetup. And I came back and I finally logged back in. And there you are leading these women through the process. I'm like, well, where did you live? Who is that? You know? And so for me, the owl just isn't someone who can see and who can analyze, okay? But who is a leadership figure, right? And so this award for this certificate here is partly for completing the course, but what I've seen throughout the time is that you just have you can see it and you can think it, and I just want to just honor you in that.
Thank you. I'm blown away. I never see myself as a leader normally. Wow, thank you.
Clapping.
You know, it's interesting when the United States formed. One of the concepts that they had was when people ran for government, for politics. One of the early practices was that the community came together and elected, or nominated, I should say, and ultimately elected, but nominated the person that they felt should go represent them. Nowadays, it's like, oh, I see myself as the leader, and I should represent you, right? It's very different. And so the reality is, the reason why, the fact that you don't see yourself as a leader is probably why you make a pretty badass leader. So now let me just share with you what I have here in this certificate, okay? It's just basically acknowledging that you finished, that you completed the Core 80 experience, okay? And from this point on, we won't let anyone come into the academy unless they have this up front, okay? They're not going to enter into our composerships and things like that unless they're not going to learn how to do it unless they first learn how to see it, okay?
I think that's good.
Yeah, yeah. And then, what was that?
I said that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you guys, are the Core 80 XO1, okay? So you're the first experience. So you have that, but nobody else will ever have, okay? And I was trying to figure out, do I call it a certificate? Do I call it a diploma? And I came up with this, which I was leaning towards a word of honor because that's a word I like to use a lot. But more importantly, we're going to call these diplomas, these certificates, trusts, because we're trusting you. And I say we, I mean 10,000 years of history, art history is trusting you to carry on what we all know, which is very important, which is being able to read and author through the language of design. And so it's just not something, a diploma of what you did, but it's a commitment to honoring this heritage, because this is what it is. It's the artist's heritage is what you're tapping into and you're receiving. And so, Julie, well, I guess you're the first one to receive the trust.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored.
Congratulations, Julie.
Yes, and I have to say, I agree with Don's insight into your personality and character, because I thought, yes, Julie would be a great leader because I would trust her. I would trust her judgment. And I didn't even look at the trust next to your name on my screen of the certificate. It's really interesting how that quality in you is communicated to Don, and I felt it also.
Wow, thank you very much.
It's a good day.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to scoot because I've got to get the kids to school. But congratulations, everyone. You've all done an awesome job with this course. It's been lovely to meet you all, and it's been fantastic. And thank you.
Beautiful.
We'll see you around again.
Bye.
In just 30 days, the Core 80 experience teaches you to decode the intentional design underneath great masterpieces. Through video lessons, assignments, and feedback, you learn to recognize the underlining structures like thrust maps, echoes, and gamuts that give master compositions substance and gravitas. Knowing how master artists and illustrators compose their artwork unlocks your ability to give your artwork more meaning and energy. Enroll today and get a 7-day no-hassle money-back guarantee at core80.com.